With every passing day, I just get closer and closer to becoming a full-blown Sethos main. Hello! Welcome back to yet another Sethos video. The only thing that people really knew about Sethos when he came out is that Aggravate was his best archetype, and I'm not here to say that that was wrong. In fact, go back, watch my other Sethos video, I say that very clearly. Aggravate is his best archetype. It's not to say that the other archetypes were unusable, but Aggravate was easily the archetype in which you could see the highest numbers out of both Sethos and just the overall team. I talked about that a little bit in my original Sethos video, but to keep it short, Aggravate was his best archetype because he has this. Long-range AoE Electro application on an attack that its talent damage scales with elemental mastery. And while I put my emphasis on charge shot Sethos, the same is true of his burst playstyle. He doesn't do a lot of damage per hit, but he applies a lot of Electro and he can very easily hit multiple targets, even if they're far apart. The reason why Aggravate was his best archetype is simply that Aggravate was the best outlet for being able to apply a ton of Electro. It had the best scaling out of all the Electro reactions, so you got the most bang for your buck with EM, and also it had Fischl, who works very well in that archetype and supplements Sethos' damage very well. But then 5.2 came out and two things changed. Number one is, of course, Auroron. He is a dedicated off-field DPS for Electrocharge, which is obviously not Aggravate. And along with that, we also got a buff to all the non-Aggravate Electro reactions. So now you get a lot more value from triggering as many Electro charges as you can, which, surprise, surprise, Sethos can trigger a ton of Electro charges. Also, shout out Soluna for reminding me that this place exists. It is easily the best place to test AoE teams. So this is the team structure that I use with Sethos, and I'm going to talk a little bit about it and also go through some other options that you can fill in these slots with. First off is, of course, Sethos, and he's irreplaceable if you want to make a Sethos team, but any Electro character can work fairly well in here. So the first big slot that I want to talk about is Auroron, who he is not necessary to this team, and I actually might not even recommend him in some contexts, specifically in those of single target. Both by nature of his damage just being straight up hampered if you don't have 4 enemies, but also by nature of the Electrocharge reaction. Because if you don't know, the Electrocharge reaction, it's somewhat like Beto's Burst, where it can actually bounce between nearby opponents, and you can get multiple instances of damage out of it, out of just one trigger. So while generally Electrocharge is a reaction that you want to be doing in AoE, anything's possible in this game, and if you want to make a single target Electrocharge team, I would probably go with Fischl over Auroron, whose damage is meant to be single target. Next is the Hydro application slot, which, as you guys can see, I've chosen to have Kokomi for my Hydro. I actually have a lot to say about this slot, because from where I see it, you have 4 main options. 5, I guess, if you want to play Candace. But the 4 options that I would recommend are, number 1, of course, Kokomi. Number 2, Farina, who we're going to get to talk a lot about. And numbers 3 and 4, I'm just going to group them together, is Yelan and Xingqiu. I'm going to see if I can play this better and beat my record. Yelan and Xingqiu first, because I'm actually not going to play them. Number 1, they require you to play Burst Sethos, which I don't like, so I'm not going to do it. But number 2, which is actually the more important part, is that both of their application is single target. So in a team like this, where you want to be triggering as many reactions on as many characters as you can, oh, hello, you want to have AoE Hydro application. And I think Kokomi and Farina are somewhat equal in that sense. Farina's AoE is smaller and harder to control, but it's not impacted by circle impact, which I think is a very notable trait. And also, Kokomi relies on you switching to her to use her burst to refresh her skill duration during your rotation, whereas Farina's just has a 30-second duration. And I also like to use Kazuha in this team as a sort of makeshift Hydro applier. If I am playing consciously and I'm not just spamming buttons, I try to set up his burst to get Hydro infused. Because between Auroron and Sethos, I have plenty of Electro application. There we go. Alright, now I'm playing mindfully, and it's actually gonna work out this time. There we go. Now that I'm properly refreshing my jellyfish, and I'm not just playing a mono Electro team. With Kokomi over Farina, obviously the biggest upside is that it's a lot tankier, because instead of draining your health, Kokomi heals you for a shit ton. Oh, I missed my refresh. I was doing so well too. Let's see if I can break my record though. Oh, I definitely can. I missed it again, didn't I? I did. Whatever, I still broke my record. I bet I could have done even better if I actually played the game right. So Kokomi makes your team a lot tankier, and also she opens up the res shred slot, because otherwise that would have to be your healer in a Farina team. This variation focuses a lot less on talent damage and a lot more on reaction damage, which is much better in an AoE context. I guess I can, now that I've beaten my record, I actually set that record yesterday with a Farina variant that I'm gonna show off, but before I get into that, I want to talk about the other unit that you could use in this slot, which is Sucrose. As mentioned, this is a team that focuses a lot on reaction damage as well as talent damage, so Sucrose's EM buff is actually pretty valuable, maybe as valuable as Kazuha's damage percent buff. The reason why I don't really like her as much, I'm gonna gear her real quick here, is because she has this. That 15-second cooldown makes it so that you have a lot less consistent access to grouping, AoE res shred, and of course her EM buff, which requires you to hit with either her skill or her burst. Something that you can do to solve this, actually I didn't swap yet. I was trying to play her as a solo healer with Farina, which it's possible. It didn't feel good at all. I wouldn't recommend it, but if that's the type of thing that you want to do, go crazy. Her issues can be somewhat remedied by sac frags, which of course is a very good option for her. Big EM substat, and also helps her with her skill cooldown. She also has a much higher energy cost burst that I don't think lasts as long, and if she's holding sac frags, then she can't hold Fav. Come on. Ah, it exploded right before I got my burst back. I'm kind of messing up on the rotation, so like, this is a skill issue. This is not a reflection of the team. I think I just need to start over, and I don't even know. I have Fav on him, right? Yeah, of course I do. Whoops. I mean, I guess this kind of shows you how much of the team is reaction damage, because I just didn't even have a goblet on the character who's supposed to be my quote-unquote main DPS, and I beat my record. I beat my all-time record. There we go, that's something. That's also part of my issues with Sucrose, is that, I didn't have enough energy on Kokomi. But her burst is a lot smaller than Kazuha's burst. You said it, Kokomi. That was a miracle, god damn. Am I really getting skill issued this hard? Am I this bad at the game? Oh, actually, you know what is something you could technically do that I haven't thought of yet? Okay, this is already feeling a little better. I'm not doing it right. But my point was that you could technically, if you wanted to... Shut up. Die, please. Die! You can use Sucrose charge attacks, which those are AoE, and especially if you're already grouping them through your skill and burst. I don't have a feel for my cooldown. Yeah. So that's why I'm just doing so many useless swaps. If I had more practice with this team, it would look a little better. Okay, yeah, that wasn't as bad as I thought. Sucrose, she is a little clunky, and I do think that she requires sac frags to work in this team, just because 15 seconds is way too long. So My preferred variation is definitely the Kazuha version,
good
but
to me.
Sucrose works. Now, moving on to this slot, as I was saying, your other real option is Farina.
Magnificent!
And the big caveat with Farina is that, well, you don't technically have to bring a healer. She can just be her own healer, but that greatly reduces her potential. So I like to bring healers with her. And let's just look at what is available to fill the dual Res Shred and heal slot. Because if you don't know, elemental reaction damage can be affected by Res Shred, so you do really, really want Res Shred in this slot. So your first thought is the new girl on the block, Sheilanen, who works fantastically with
Let's
Farina,
get this
but
over with.
actually this is a context in which Sheilanen is pretty bad. The first big thing is the scroll set. We've already got Auron holding it to buff both Electro and Hydro damage, so if we throw it on her, the only element that she's going to buff is Geo. The second thing, and this is actually true for the rest of the units we're going to go over in this video, it's that she doesn't do any grouping. Both Sethos and Auron benefit greatly from grouping. Auron because Electrocharge is an AoE reaction, and Sethos because he has this big ass beam that he can hit people with, and if they're closer together, it's easier. The third is that Anemo units have access to the swirl reaction. Because of their grouping, Sucrose and Kazuha make the best use of it, but long story short, when you build an Anemo unit for full EM, and they trigger a lot of swirls, they contribute a lot of personal damage to this team. Sheilanen just doesn't have that. And the final thing, which I'm just being a bit of a hater at this point, but it's funny, so I have to mention it. Her Res Shred is just worse than VV. Hers is 36 and VV is 40. So yeah, Sheilanen, again, just like Sucrose, fantastic unit in a lot of other teams, but unlike Sucrose actually, she's very bad in this team. So we have two other options, right? The first one is Xianyun, who I actually don't have, but it doesn't matter because she wouldn't be good. She doesn't do any grouping. She is built for plunging attacks, which Sethos, as a bow unit, doesn't want to use plunging attacks, and she doesn't buff anything that isn't a plunging attack. So really, we're only left with one option, Jean, right? The thing is, I'm a little iffy on Jean in this team. She has good healing, but her burst field is small, and it's hard to swirl specific elements that you want. I guess I can try a small showcase. Triple Fav team with Electro Resonance. If I ever swap to a character and they don't have their burst, I'm suing Hoyo. So you can kind of see already here. Her burst knocks guys out pretty easily. Okay, great. That was a skill issue, that was not a team issue. There are a few things that I don't like about Jean in this team, and frankly about Jean in general. You usually want to be using your character's skill to get their Res Shred, but Jean's, it's this thrust, which it's pretty hard to hit multiple opponents with unless they're all already directly in front of you. So what do? We just don't have a good healer for this slot? No. I'm a liar. I was lying. There's a secret third option that everyone's forgotten about.
I'm so sleepy.
Woo! Sayu! Wait. I didn't do that on purpose, I swear. Sayu is a very forgotten unit. Sayu is a very forgotten unit. And that's not to say that's not for... Sayu is a deeply forgotten unit, and I can't say that it's not for a good reason. Because generally, Jean is just an upgrade to Sayu. Her big thing... Because Sucrose and Kazuha just completely... Because Sucrose and Kazuha are so much better than the rest of the Anemo cast, Jean's only, like, utility is her healing, which, checking on it, the initial burst heal, which is the thing that heals all your nearby party members, Sayu's is 175%, and Jean's 400%! Yeah, that's over twice as much. So when combined with the higher base attack that 5 stars naturally get, and also she does get her healing bonus ascension stat, she just does more healing than Sayu. So Sayu is supposedly obsolete. But no, this is it. This is the team where you want to use Sayu. First off, I actually want to talk a little bit about the healing thing, because Jean isn't always a direct upgrade to Sayu, because Sayu has a few different ways to heal. Jean mostly just has her burst, which most of that healing is packed into the initial heal. You get 400% healing the entire party, and then this, the continuous regeneration that's only 40%, that only applies to your on-fielder. And when you're playing with Farina, that tiny amount of healing can get pretty easily counteracted by your HP drain. Sayu, well, the number one thing is you still have to stand in her burst field, and it still only heals one character, but the AoE of her burst is a lot larger, so your circle impacted a lot less. Sayu's burst AoE being larger is, I mean, of course it's a benefit. You have more room to walk around and still be healed, and also the enemies have more room to walk around and still be hit. Another thing about Sayu is that her big burst of healing isn't the only amount of healing that she does. Also, I think you can move her field. Yeah, you can move her field if you want. But her healing, she first has this, which it's kind of a nothing burger. When she's on field and triggers a swirl reaction, she'll heal everyone by a tiny bit. It's nice. The more important parts are that, number one, her overtime healing is actually still pretty good. The initial burst is less than half of what Jean has, and this is even at a much higher talent level, but the overtime healing, this is almost 4 times as high. And also, you may be thinking, oh, well, that matters less because it's single target healing. Well, it's actually not single target healing. When she unlocks this passive talent, your other off-field party members get a little bit of that healing. So really, it makes it so that all your party members are getting healed for, it's a little bit less, but it's still around the same amount as Jean would be healing only your on-field character. So Sayu has a lot more synergy with Farina than I think many people realize. And also, her skill, it's way easier to hit as many opponents as you need to, because you can just hold it and run around with it for as long as you need. Maybe I'll just make the Masters of the Nightwind like my new outro location, because I really do love them. There you have it. 5.2. That was big for Sethos. As a character who gets most of his damage from spamming elemental reactions, getting a buff to those reactions and also a dedicated DPS, sub-DPS for that matter, for that elemental reaction type, it's crazy, it's big, it's wild. Fischl is still going to be the best for single target, but I think it's great that we now have a really strong option for other Sethos stuff. I also think it's great. This totally could just be me tweaking and hating on Jean, but I think it's really cool that I have a team that I want to use Sayu actively in now. Because for units like this that get pretty easily forgotten, I'm always on the lookout for weird stuff that I can do with them. That's all from me. If you like this one, you can give it a like. If you like me, you can subscribe. And if you have more silly Sethos ideas, you can comment them. I am up to do just about anything.